Yeah, where is your thing? Oh, and I got my speaker on. Testing, testing.
I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Public Works Committee for the City of Rapid City on Tuesday, March 13th at 12:30 p.m. First order of business is roll call and determination of quorum.
Drew.
Here.
Solomon. Modrick. Roberts. Nordstrom. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Brenda. Next up is the adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Nordstrom moves and Modrick seconds for the adoption of the agenda. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign, and the agenda is adopted. Now it's time for general public comment. A time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the aldermen present. And I have no request speaker forms for general public comment, so general public comment is closed. Now we'll move on to consent items, items 1 through 15. Public comment is opened. I still have no speaker requests, so we'll close public comment. And now we'll go to members of the committee to see what if they'd like to remove any items, items 1 through 15. Seeing no removals, then we'll
Move to adopt it.
move to adopt the consent items by Nordstrom. Do I have a second? Second by Solomon. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? And we've got approval of the consent calendar. Now we go on to non-consent items, 16 and 17. So public comment is open on 16 and 17, and I have two speaker request items on item 16. So I'll call those folks up right now. Kyler. Excuse me, I don't see. Treelor. Okay, Kyle Treelor. If you could state your name again, and because I can't, and also your address.
Sure. Kyle Treelor with KTM Design Solutions, 528 Kansas City Street.
Thank you.
Thank you for hearing this item. We're bringing this item before you as a result of a meeting that we had with city staff in which this was the recommended way to move this request forward. I just want to give you kind of a little bit of a background on why this is in front of you and where this is coming from. Essentially, we have a development that we're planning that's 300 plus single-family residential lots on 160 acres. We have one full access into this property, and it's along a section line on the east side of this property. Through a series of plats that were approved, essentially there's a 1,400-foot stretch of off-site street that borders an existing substation owned by the Black Hills Electric and a private individual, in which the right-of-way has been dedicated. We have no public improvements, and there's nothing securing those public improvements. So we have, basically 1,400 feet of off-site improvements. That there is no agreement in place to have those secured. That's the only way for us to have this full access into this property, and it's needed for the development. We've got so that's kind of the basis of why we're here. I think it's a problem, and we've had several meetings on this. Our first applications were back in 2006 for this development. This road corridor that we're talking about was identified as a collector street. So, even after these subsequent plats that came through were approved, we've always had this area identified as a collector. Nothing was ever made, or no exceptions were granted to guarantee that this street not be put in. So we have a situation, somewhat similar to what we had over on Elm Street, except for there's not even a warp in this case. There's nothing guaranteeing these improvements. So, we had a meeting with city staff. This was the recommended move forward to discuss this. see if we can move it to the CIP committee for discussion. And so that's why we're here, and I'll be available for any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Brian Hammerbeck. Item 16.
Just to briefly follow up on what Kyle said, our request is to keep this moving forward. I think the committee made a recommendation that take this to the City Council and to the CIP committee for consideration, and that's what we're asking you to do. Thank you.
Please stand by for questions. Okay. Now we'll move forward on this item to council members. Okay, I'm sorry. Request funding to construct an approximately 1,400-foot collector street to provide access to proposed 175-acre residential subdivision located south of Catron Boulevard and east of Wellington Drive. Estimated cost $1,500,000, and the chair recognizes Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I begin my time with asking Dale Tech a question?
Sure.
Thank you. Hi, Dale.
Hi.
We meet again. So we've got a 300-plus single-family home opportunity. We have a need for the homes. The location is prime for it. It's the building location. It's still filling in our infill sources without going outside of our 3-mile boundary. So this is a really great project. I'd hate to see this go on delay when we need homes and housing, and we need them now. And the fact that they've been first applying for this in 2006, it really shows the public how long it takes for planned development to start to form based on the timing and the developer and the need. And for 300 homes, that means we have a need, and we've been discussing that an awful lot. So we've got this 1,400-foot that is not in their boundary and not in their acres, and yet we've got a Catron Boulevard need for safety. That's a huge factor on this road. And with one access into 300 plus, I believe we need to make some strong consideration for how we're going to get the people safely in and out of this development. Can you share with me the safety factors and what options we can use to get this development off the ground?
I'll begin, I guess, by the safety issues. This development is proposing two means of ingress and egress so that they're compliant with our 40-unit rule. The access that they have available to them at this moment is a restricted access on Catron Boulevard, so it's just going to be a right-in, right-out only. Mm-hmm. This additional access to the east, as Mr. Treloar indicated, roughly 1,400 foot of marginally improved section line exists to service this subdivision. Mm-hmm. The DOT considered that in the construction of Catron Boulevard and has identified this as a full service, full access intersection, so there will be right-ins, right-outs, left-ins, left-outs allowed, so it'll be full access to serve this. So as far as safety is concerned, you know, their other access, the one to the west, is going to be the safest condition because it's right in, right out. There's not any, you're eliminating a lot of the conflicting movements when you have people turning across traffic and so on and so forth. However, that does not adequately serve the needs of the citizens in that area. You have to come at the subdivision in one direction and leave in one direction. Mm-hmm. You know, as far as 1,400 foot of roadway, yeah, this property has been located on the outskirts of town since it was developed. We have properties that are very rural in nature and don't have facilities that service them adequately, and this is a very situation where there's a gap between a arterial roadway and the development. So the question comes before the council, does the city council want to spend capital improvement dollars to spur this development that's located well beyond the boundary of an arterial road. Our capital improvement funds are used to reconstruct existing streets. If you talk to any public works department in the upper Midwest, everyone has the same problem. We do not have enough funding available for our existing infrastructure. So to utilize funds out of our CIP, we're going to have to scrap existing projects that have been on the books for dozens of years. So my recommendation is to not approve this funding source for the, per their request. So that's where I'm at.
So with that information, when we take in consideration a new development like this that has the opportunity for this many homes, property taxes, the sales taxes that come back out of it, the workforce, the projects that hire and contractors and home sales and all of that, does that ever factor in? Because perhaps we are not doing it now, but when you've got a development opportunity, but it is beyond access in a safe, and I'm going to again use the safety side of this on this very busy corridor collector, do we ever take that into account of how it can offset itself?
No, the City Council has never given the Capital Improvement Committee any direction or policy regarding the weighing of new development roads over the repair of our existing infrastructure.
So when you said that there, may I ask him one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
So when you said that there are two accesses, really there's only the Street D named right now off of Catron, and that's the right in, right out that you're talking about. Is that right? So it's just the one in, one out on the map?
I'd have to look at the
Okay.
exhibit.
Because that's all I see if we don't put this safety road in there, is just the one access side, unless I'm missing something, but I sure can't find, at least yet, where that's going to come in. And then the right in, right out, it does create a safety factor because I happen to live on a right in, right out, and what you see is homeowners cutting across anyway and making their left-hand turn. So we would have a safety factor if we enforce the right in, right out, if we don't have that secondary release for 300 homes and 600 or 2.5 people per home. And I would just like to see if we have an opportunity to have new considerations as we're wanting more development in our community because we have a housing shortage. What do you think?
That's a policy decision that I've beat this drum to death. We need more funding to fix our existing streets. And if we go using it for other purposes, we're not meeting that mission.
Would you be able to send us maybe the policy line there so we can take a review on it? And then that's all I've got. Thank you.
All right, we've got some people that want to get in on this conversation. Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of thoughts, I guess. I'm all for the development. I am pleased that the developer wants to develop this property. I've proven with my votes that I'm all for smart growth for Rapid City. What I'm not in favor of is using the CIP to spur this growth at this time, and that is because of our existing needs. And I think Mr. Tech said it well. This is not infill development. This is actually expanding the city limits, and we do have a lot of needs, and we've talked about that. And it's tough. We have to balance all of those, and I get it. And the problem is, we do that for this project. The next developer is going to want us to push down all the other CIP projects so that they can have their development done, and it creates a precedent I'm not comfortable with at this time. It's a great project, and I would urge the developer, obviously, to put in that secondary access if they can. The only way I would do this is if we were legally compelled to do so, and I believe we got a message from our city attorney's office on that to ask if this is something that we had to do. And I don't know, Joel, if you, I see you're in the queue, so maybe you'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm just not comfortable using the CIP for new roads. because we have existing roads that do need to be taken care of. And it is a tough balance, you know, and we have TIFs and things like that where we incentivize growth. And obviously, we're going to be incentivizing infill development within Rapid City. I know that we have a TIF rewrite that's coming, but the CIP itself at this time, I don't particularly want to use for incentive because we have a lot of other needs. And so that money, I don't want to push other projects down that have been on that list for a long time for a project like this unless we absolutely had to. And I don't believe we have a legal reason that we have to. That said, I'm all for the development. I'm all for growing Rapid City, increasing the tax rolls by adding more citizens to the community, but not through our CIP, I guess. That's where I'm a sticking point, and so I would not be supporting that kind of motion if it's made. I'll yield the floor for now.
Thank you. The chair recognizes City Attorney Joel Landine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would touch on that briefly. Yes, I don't believe the city has any liability to the developer or any legal obligation to construct this road on their behalf. I mean, the need driving the construction of this road is their proposed development. And I would just point out when I hear it, you know, that somehow it's our responsibility for safety. It's not our responsibility to build it. It's the developer's responsibility to build it. And there's nothing that prevents the developer from building this road other than cost and how that impacts, you know, the lots and the lot cost and the development. And certainly philosophically, that's a question we all need to ask, is if that road and construction, that cost to develop this neighborhood makes the lots economically, you know, not viable, is that something that maybe we should be building? But if it doesn't, then the developer, you know, the only question really is whose cost should that be? And, you know, I would also stress that there aren't going to be 300 lots there if there isn't a secondary access, because we have a rule that says you can only have 40 units with one point of access. So unless you grant an exception that allows 300 lots with one point of access, there aren't going to be 300 lots there, or over 40 lots without, you know, a secondary access. So again, as the Public Works Director said, the policy decision is really pretty simple. Do you want to keep the CIP to invest in existing infrastructure, or do you want to start using that to expand and build roads for developers that benefit the development versus saying, no, this is your cost, you need to pay for this, and if that makes it economically unviable for this development, I guess maybe then we need to look at this development, or the developer does, and decide whether or not to move forward. But, you know, it would be a huge shift to take CIP funds to build roads to access private development like this, a specific development. It's one thing if you're looking at, say, in Anamosa Street, where I think maybe we used some funds and federal funds to open up an entire swath, and it was a, you know, a major arterial that we built. But for building a collector street like this, it would be unprecedented, and I think you could expect that other developers are going to come in and then see that as a potential pot of money to come in and request from, which again would cut into our what we have to spend on improving and repairing our existing infrastructure. So certainly would set quite the precedent if you were to do that. And again, I don't think we're under any legal obligation to do so.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I understand, we don't have a motion.
We do not.
If I may make a motion to table this item.
Motion has been made to table this item, second by Solomon. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign?
No.
I'll break the, I'm opposed, so I'm with Lisa and Roberts on this one, so thank you. So we'll go on with the discussion. Excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. Kyle, can I ask you a question? You said in 2006 originally is when this subdivision started getting some traction, when it started. In 2006, was that on the future road plan map?
In 2006, it first came across as a stipulation of this development that it be added to the future land use plan. It was then subsequently added to the future land use plan at that point in time.
Okay, one of the reasons I was asking that is I'm kind of surprised when Black Hills Corp came in, if that road was on the future land use plan, that there wasn't more discussion about, you know, I know how they did it. They did it with a lot line adjustment, so they got around a few stipulations, but I'm surprised there wasn't some kind of a discussion on a warp for that road at the time. I just have an adherent. It just makes my skin shiver when the city talks about developers needing to do developments outside of their project, outside of their of the property that they own, to make something work. I know the state of South Dakota's got laws on the books about where we need to and what we need to do as far as putting infrastructure in a certain amount of years. And it just worries me that there could be a possibility, because of the fact that we did Elm Street. I know that was different, you know, there was differences in that, but I hate to see a project fail because of bad city planning. You know, even though there's been a lot of that over the years, and a lot of people have dropped the ball, and probably including me on this council over the last 7 years, because this did come through when I was on the council, you know, but as a lot line, as a lot line adjustment, that was something that probably didn't trigger anything, you know, in my mind anyway. So, you know, I see issues coming. I see issues coming all over town because of our infrastructure. But, you know, we have to open up these areas for growth. Otherwise, we're losing all of our business and all of our homes to Box Elder and to Somerset and to Meade County and to Custer County and to, you know, and we're losing that property tax. We're losing a lot of sales tax. You know, people shop locally. People, you know, if they're in Meade County, they may go to Sturgis, and not all the time, but part of the time. So, you know, growth is what's going to spur our CIP growing. Growth is what's going to spur our taxes moving upwards. And you know what? $1.5 million investment in 300 homes. You know, if they're $300,000 homes, that's a $100 million investment that's going to go on the tax rolls. So I think we really need to look at, if we're going to do this, are we doing it as an investment? Are we doing it for the future? Are we doing it, you know? And I think there needs to be a good discussion on projects like this coming forward and what's our responsibility as a city. So anyway, thank you, Kyle. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I simply want to point out and remind you guys of the CIP procedure and policy that you approved in October of 2017. I'm going to read just a little bit of it. Deferring essential maintenance and or asset replacement can negatively impact service delivery and increase long-term costs. As such, the city will periodically assess the condition of assets and infrastructure and appropriately plan for required major maintenance and replacement needs. Efforts will be made to allocate sufficient funds in the multi-year capital plan and operating budgets for condition assessment, preventative and major maintenance, and repair and replacement of critical infrastructure assets. And then further on, when it talks about priorities, let me find it. The capital improvement program will incorporate a methodology to determine a general sense of project priority according to community needs. For public works infrastructure projects, the primary focus will be based on rehabilitation, joint projects with utilities, and infill development. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Madam Chair, I'm going to yield for now. Thank you.
Okay. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will yield also.
Okay. All right. So Chair recognizes our city attorney, Joel Landine. Joel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, to touch a little bit on what Alderman Roberts said, there wasn't anything to trigger it, and I think you acknowledge that the lot line adjustment, the reason the road, it wasn't something that was missed. There was no legal mechanism to trigger the improvement. And I think the important thing, while the staff was never frankly all that supportive of the lot line adjustment, and it's been amended now because of situations, frankly, where there was some platting where maybe some improvements should have been triggered and weren't. In this situation, even if there had been a requirement that they replat, which would have triggered the improvement, there's a good chance that Black Hills Corp might have decided to do their project differently, so they wouldn't have triggered the improvement. Based on the cost of the improvement, I think it's likely that they would have done whatever they could to avoid triggering that cost one way or another. So even without the lot line improvement, we probably wouldn't have a road there right now. You know, I do want to say something, though, about the lack of planning, I guess. This isn't being triggered, or this cost isn't being put on the developer because of a lack of city planning. There was no development there. We're not out actively building roads, and you could certainly have a discussion about whether we should be more proactive about how to expand our infrastructure. But, you know, part of that, while that sounds great as we sit here and talk about it philosophically, then the trade-off on that is when a developer has land somewhere else and they don't have infrastructure there, and they want to build it, then they need to pay for it, and you don't pay to get the infrastructure out to them at that point. So you're really driving where development is. And if people own land in that area, they really like it, but the people that own land elsewhere may not be as big of fans of that approach. So again, is this road being triggered because of lack of city planning, or is it being triggered because a developer at some point got land at a reasonable price or less expensive because there wasn't any infrastructure there, and now the cost to develop that land have increased because of that, because there's more infrastructure that needs to be extended to service that development. If you buy land and develop outside of where is currently developed, there's an additional cost to that. And the question philosophically is who should pay for that? And yeah, I mean, we would all like to see the houses, and we all want to see development in Rapid City, and that has economic benefit. But philosophically, should we be using the CIP and taxpayer money to extend the infrastructure to this development or other developments, and thereby increasing or decreasing the cost to the developer and increasing their bottom line? And what really are we getting out of that? What is the economic impact? When you have a tax increment district, it seems to me there's more discussion about what the economic impact is, and that is the mechanism in the past we've done that by. In this situation, it's kind of a new discussion, but you know, are we really looking, if you're going to justify it based on the economic impact, then how does that look? What is the process for that? And, you know, again, we have limited amounts of money. What are you going to do if you start diverting this to make development feasible and increase the bottom line for the developers, but at the expense of our existing infrastructure and what that money is currently used for? So, you know, this is right now you've got a specific development in front of you, but this is a lot bigger questions and a bigger picture item than just one development.
All right. Chair recognizes John Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion. We move this to council without recommendation. If I can get a second, hold the floor.
Motion is to move to council without recommendation by Roberts, second by Modrick. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Thank
Okay.
you very much. I appreciate that. And I do believe that this is
Sorry about that. I
is
jumped
and can
ahead.
be a very long discussion. And
Yeah.
I would love to have this discussion. I'd love to have it in public, because I think the public, you know, should have the opportunity to know. There's a lot of things that our city attorney said that I agree with. You know, Black Hills Corp probably would have went somewhere else with that project if they had been, you know, required to do all the improvements. And I see it all the time. You know, I see people moving out of Rapid City because they don't want to pay for the improvements in certain places. I see, people not coming to Rapid City because of the improvements that need to be done in certain places. I mean, we've got places and we've got developments that are good for growth, thank God for Rapid City, because that's where people are coming to. But if they're coming into an area that's existing and may need quite a bit of improvements, it can limit it. It can be very difficult, I'll just give a quick example. I sold a piece of property 3 weeks ago, and the sewer and the water tie-ins, just to connect to the sewer and water because they were on their own well and their own septic, just the tie-ins on those two properties were about $70,000. That can become very problematic. So, there's a lot of things that we need to have a discussion on if we literally want growth in Rapid City. If we don't want growth, I think we should just be doing things the way we have been. But if we seriously want to have growth and more growth in Rapid City, because we do have growth, we have limited growth. We're not a Sioux Falls. We're not a Sturgis. Look at what's happening in Sturgis over the last couple of years. Look at what's happening in Piedmont and Meade County. But, they're more competitive when it comes to, different types of projects. I mean, Meade County has got a tax rebate. What does Rapid City have? We are not competing with our neighbors, and we need to start competing with our neighbors. Anyway, thank you very much.
Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been struggling to come up with a better motion because
Point of order, just
No, thank you.
Good
No, I
question.
did, but we did, yeah. Put the brakes on.
Good question. I'm trying to come up with a better motion to keep this in a positive light because I would like to see the development take place, but I'm reluctant to endorse the funds coming from the CIP because I get to see that on a monthly report what projects are on the CIP. So, Mr. Treloar, I thank you very much for bringing this project forward, but coming it out of the CIP, I just can't support that because of what will happen with the current projects that we have on the list, and then other projects that need to be added to the list, and I mean needed to be added to the list. So if there's some other way, hopefully we can find some other alternative method to coming up with a funding source for you on that if the city desires to choose that process. But right now, there's other options out there, and I'm not that familiar with them. The TIF is one option, but I don't know if the return on investment will be that great for that. But if I would have had a better motion out there for you, I would come up with that. But right now, I just can't support the funding source as being the CIP. So I'm willing to keep the mind open as far as other funding sources available for you and or partnerships or something. I just want to keep this project moving forward in the best way we can. But unfortunately for me, the CIP is not that process. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here because I have a couple questions at this point. So I have a question for Dale Tech. Dale, do we have a history of building roads? It was said earlier we don't have a history of building roads to developments. Is that the case?
That is correct.
We've never done this before? This is totally new?
I won't say that we've never done it. The tax increment financing has been the typical way for developers to make improvements that are off-site.
Okay. And then there is an ordinance on the one access or two access on all developments, even not in our city limits, or, what are we looking at here?
Well, this particular property is in our city limits.
Okay, and it has to have two accesses to have the...
If there are over 40 units, yes.
But we don't have any kind of a regulation on what that access has to consist of. It could be a gravel road, right?
Most certainly it could be some public way. However, if you have 300 homes utilizing a gravel road, it'll be cratered out full of potholes the first time it rains. It will be unmaintainable. So that's very poor planning, is allowing that level of traffic density on a gravel road.
Okay, that's interesting. There's a couple things that occur to me here when I'm looking at this. You know, when we think of the two accesses, this isn't like Chapel Valley. You know, I mean, in Chapel Valley, you have to go over road or water to get out of the development, you know, on that one access there, which makes it a really dangerous place to live. You could drive out of this area. I mean, if you had to, you could just drive over lawns and you could get out in a different way if there was an emergency. So this makes it a little bit different to me. And also, I don't believe, I know the CIP is very important to our city and to have those roads repaired. But I don't think anybody's ever moved here for our roads. I don't think anybody's ever moved away because of our roads. I think this is the way it is all over the Midwest. We have freeze-thaw cycles, and the roads are just, they deteriorate, and we're doing the best we can with them. But I don't necessarily think that this shouldn't come out of the CIP. So I'm still going to look at that as a possibility, even if we split the cost. I'm not sure what that would do, but that might be a way to get this done and make everybody happy. But as I said before, I've talked to a lot of people that said they'd like to move because of the roads, but they don't. And nobody's moving here because we have stellar roads or bad roads. So, but they would move here because we had homes and we have jobs. So in that case, I'm kind of leaning towards saying yes to this, but the discussion will happen on Monday night. Right now, I'm going to recognize Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that this was good discussion by committee, because that's what this committee is here for, and we're bringing up a lot of, you know, that was a creative idea. I think that was really forward-thinking. And Richie, who chairs the CIP, he really gets where we're at with the next 10 years of CIP. One of the mentions by our legal was the TIF and the TIDS. I think also Paulina has mentioned, which is a city tool, and where I believe the last I heard was that we are redeveloping the TID for economic development purposes. We have invested, as I know, last year I think it was $400,000 to economic development in order to do exactly what we need to do, and that is to drive economic development into our city, create jobs, which creates housing, which creates the property taxes and the sales taxes. Just a project alone of 300 development in this prime location with the Walmarts and everything that is down in that section, that only makes great growth and development and a more desirable area. So as Councilman Roberts had stated, what is the generating factor? Now, we can't obviously put that on a CIP because we don't have policy on that of what generates it, but we should really keep discussion open and find a way to increase our economic development by city, public-private partnerships to make these things happen. So I think this has been great discussion. It may also benefit the full council to have the same discussion instead of just letting it die in committee. So I hope it can move forward to the full council on Monday night. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Joel Lending.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't want to extend this unnecessarily, but something that was said, I'm going to throw out some institutional knowledge. When I heard the discussion or the question, I guess Alderman Drew, about gravel road, we don't need a full access, I immediately thought of Minnesota Street and the Southeast Connector. So you only had one point of access in Elk Country Estates. The developer wanted to continue to subdivide. There was a decision at some point there will be a secondary access at the Southeast Connector, and so they allowed them to construct a gravel, unimproved road up to the Southeast Connector with the idea that if there was a fire and emergency that people could get out like that. What ended up happening in reality is that people used it. And so we're turning off the Southeast Connector onto this unimproved gravel road, or turning out onto the Southeast Connector from this. I think probably most of you were on the council when we've been having the debate about, now that it's an improved intersection, whether it should be signalized. So you can imagine the problems that were created when people are coming over a curb onto off a gravel road out there with no signal. And essentially the neighborhood and all the problems it was causing drove, okay, well, when we did that, how we did it, and it's just been it was a thorn in everyone's side for quite a while, although at the time, everybody thought, well, this is a nice solution. They can continue to subdivide, and we'll have this gravel road. When I look at this, the problem with the access that they're proposing to build is that it's the right in, right out. This is the one where you can make left turns. So if we build an unimproved or a very basic gravel road up there in the idea that it will only be used in fire situations or if there's an emergency, I think that's unrealistic. History has told us because that's going to be the left turn in, people are going to make left turns on this, and this is going to become, whether you want it to be or not, or the developer, it's going to become the primary access. And you're going to, and I don't know how many of you drive that. I don't drive it frequently, but I've driven up and down that hill enough to know that at the speeds, if you have people shooting out of a little gravel roadway area onto Catron, you're going to have accidents and problem. And there's going to be an immediate demand if houses get built out there for you to improve that, and not only improve it, but probably to signalize it. So, you know, I would be careful going down the idea that the solution to this might be to allow them to have a gravel secondary access emergency road there as a basis to grant an exception to having only one improved point of access to this development.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just for the record, I think I'll support the motion because the conversation obviously needs to continue to be had at a larger scale because of the precedent that it would set. I'm going to stick to not using CIP. It is unfair to say the city doesn't promote growth because we have plenty of tax increment districts, including for Dream Design, that I've supported and we've supported, and that have developed these roads so that we can have the growth that we've had, and it's been awesome, and that's an avenue. I just don't want CIP to turn into that fund, and it's earmarked for improvement. It's called capital improvement projects. It's improving, meaning there's something there, and we're improving it. And so just from my standpoint, that is important for me that we not use these funds to spur development. We have other ways to do that, and in those senses, I'm all ears, as you know. But again, CIP, to me, I think let's take care of the things that we have with that money, use other mechanisms in order to incentivize growth in strategic areas that makes sense for the whole community. And that's where I'm at on this discussion. It will not change by Monday night. I'm pretty closed-minded about it, I guess, in that sense. I'm a pretty open-minded guy, but for this CIP, I think we're going to use it for our existing projects. I don't want to. It's not fair to other projects that they be pushed down. At the same time, there's a ton of value for 300 homes. Adding that to our tax rolls, I'm all for that development. And obviously, I want to have a great relationship with the city and the developer in this project and all the projects so that we can have that kind of growth. But again, just not out of CIP. So I'll yield. Thank you.
I guess before I call the question, I would just like to add that I think with creative discussion and solutions, we might have a win-win here. So hopefully that is what will happen. So the motion on the floor is to move this to Monday night without recommendation. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? And the motion passes. We're on to community development, and this is to approve staff's request to acknowledge the downtown parking study recommendations, establish a parking advisory committee, and direct staff to develop a parking implementation strategy. And we go to Sarah Hansel.
Good afternoon, Sarah Hansel, Division of Long Range Planning. I want to start by making two announcements, actually. We're having a public open house for this very parking study that's taking place this Thursday at the Dahl Art Center. There will be two presentations, one starting at 5:30 and one starting at 6:30. So this is how we're going to be kind of disseminating the information that's in the parking study and getting some information out to the public and also collecting their feedback and comments. And then I also want you to know that the consultant firm is coming to the council meeting on Monday, and they will be giving a full presentation to the full council. So I can take any kind of maybe questions you have in the meantime, but I would maybe recommend that you save the parking discussion until after the open house and when the consultant team is here.
Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in that case, perhaps, I hate to send another thing to council without recommendation, but if we're going to get a full presentation on Monday, that again will be the time for that discussion. You know, and the fact that we're going to have open houses on Thursday. So in that sense, I guess I will make the motion then to send to council without recommendation.
And we're just to approve this and acknowledge this report, so I'm not sure that, okay, what?
Move to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, John. I will rescind my previous motion, and I'll move to acknowledge. Is that what we're seeking here? I see approve, so I just...
There's, the request is actually has three parts. The first is to
Yeah.
acknowledge the recommendations. We're also looking to make a parking advisory committee function in a more permanent role. And then also, you know, staff will have some more legwork to do in terms of putting together the details of how to implement these recommendations. So Monday night's meeting, we will be looking for that direction to proceed with an action plan.
I think you were correct with your first motion, actually,
Okay.
in light of all that.
If I may retain the floor.
Go ahead.
Okay. That said, easy for me to say. You have to pardon me. I am a little under the weather. It's probably showing. This is a critical conversation for us to have. There's been a lot of study and research. This impacts a great deal of what we want to do with our downtown. I know this will not come without a little bit of controversy on both sides, and it's going to take, you know, some different ways of thinking for sure. It's going to take common sense from our council, but also forward thinking from our council. And I think we are committed to that because we know that the downtown is the heart of Rapid City. It really spills over to the neighborhoods surrounding it and so on. And so this is important for us to make sure we get a proper presentation on this for the whole council and the public, of course. And then we have good conversation. And I'm interested to see where this will lead, because it has a lot of impact. And it just knowing a little bit of things that I've read here, it's going to be a little different, but it can be very positive. And so we're going to think far ahead as we have these conversations. And so even though this is going to council, you said my original motion was the right motion.
I think so.
Okay, whatever our chair says, but but I think that's going to be a great conversation, good respectful dialogue. We'll hear from the stakeholders, especially downtown, and those who shop and eventually live downtown. And those open houses Thursday at the Doll, 5:30 and 6:30. I think those are critical. Great first initial step in this conversation. And with that, I'll yield.
Okay. The motion on the floor is to send this to council, item 17 to council without recommendation for Monday night's meeting. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Nordstrom, second by Solomon, and all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We are adjourned.